Today I begin the journey of stripping out my dead car in preparation for its chassis swap. Basically, I just need to get rid of all the material that will not be a part of the final car. Most of this is pretty easy stuff I can take off with my hands and just move around in the truck bed. Just gotta get all this stuff out of the way so I can get to the big task, which is pulling the engine. I don't have an engine hoist, and I don't want to spend a couple $100 on one when, at least for the foreseeable future, I'm only going to use it once. What I do have is a lot of heavy-duty wood laying around, and a simple chain hoist isn't too expensive compared to a fully assembled unit, so I figure I'll just build one for really cheap, and when it's done, disassemble it and reuse the wood for something else. That's the plan, but there's a lot of other junk to get rid of before I can even get at the engine. Now, I am all about repairing things, keeping old stuff, reusing it in new projects as much as possible, but I gotta draw the line somewhere. My truck is crammed full of moldy carpet and headliner, cracked plastic bumpers and interior panels, and I'll need this space for everything that comes out of the engine bay. I'm keeping everything that's reasonable to keep here. The battery's still good, my custom headlights will probably get reused in some fashion. Fenders will get put back on when all this is said and done, but for now my focus is buying myself as much room as possible to get the engine out. I have never pulled an engine before, but lucky for me in this scenario, none of these parts have to go back in, so I can kind of just take everything out, regardless of whether it needs to come out to get the engine. I was planning on keeping the suspension intact so I could roll the car around on all four wheels, but when I was pulling the axles so the transmission and engine could be lifted out, the entire shock mount rusted through and fell out. That could have been bad if the car was still on the road, but lucky for me I'm not planning on reusing any of the Hyundai suspension and the body itself is rust-free. So the plan continues, just with no front wheels. After quite a bit of elbow grease and a lot of draining fluids, the engine bay was pretty much stripped and it was time for the fun part, building the engine hoist. Some of you might remember this thing if you've been watching the channel for a while. I built an office chair that rolled on 1,200-pound caster wheels. There was no functional purpose for this, but it just sounded kind of fun. I didn't end up using it that much, but now the casters can actually come in handy. Each wheel is rated at about 300 pounds, so with 4 of them it'll be more than enough to hold up the whole structure and lift the engine. These were about $15 a pop, but if I were building this new, I probably could have gotten away with smaller ones. For the main structure of my hoist, I'll also be reusing old parts that are probably very overkill. These are old 2x12s back when they were actually 2-inch by 12-inch, so something like 75 years old or so. 2 of these up the sides, probably 4x4s across the top because I don't have any long enough. Should be good. Think about it. I needed some longer boards to run across the top, so I bought 2 new 6-foot 4x4s. These were about $9 each. I usually don't buy new wood, but I figure now is not a bad time to stockpile, because who knows what's going to happen with these prices in a couple weeks. My scrap wood reserves have been getting low anyway. I stuck the 2 4x4s right across the top. I feel like one would probably work, but I didn't want to take any chances when my toes are on the line. This is a fairly small engine, it's only going to weigh a couple 100 pounds, but building overkill can never hurt. With the basic frame up, now I had to correct this side-to-side wobble. Right now the only thing keeping this from falling over is the bend strength of those screws. So I cut up some of the scrap 2x12 that I had left over and stuck that in as a 45-degree brace. I realized after I think this would have been stronger if I had it mounted perpendicular to how it is now, but still should be plenty. So while I'm charging power tool batteries and brainstorming a little bit, the main thing I'm thinking about is how the bottom works. Because if the thing needs to move, it actually needs to have a pretty wide base so the whole thing doesn't just tip over, because it's going to be somewhat top heavy when the engine is lifted. The nice part is, at least, since I removed everything out of the engine bay, I only have to lift it high enough to clear this. I might be overthinking this for how small of an engine it is, but, you know, safety. I chopped an 8-foot 4x4 in half to get 2 4-foot bases, which the giant caster wheels were then attached to. I was a little bit lazy with the way I put these on. I kind of just reused the 2x6s that they were mounted to the office chair with. I sprayed some paint through the mounting holes to make sure there was clearance for the bolts to run through. The 2x6 has T-nuts on the back of it that some bolts will thread into to keep the wheel in place. I think the most likely failure point for this whole design would be the screws fitting the 2x6 to the 4x4. If you make one of these yourself, evaluate all those choices on your own. Don't trust me, I didn't do any math here. But I mean, I've seen plenty of videos of 3 guys pulling out an engine out of a truck with their hands, so it's gotta be better than that, right? This thing looked like it might be a little flimsy without some kind of brace in the center, so I put a brace in the center. This is simply trust your gut based engineering. If I look at it and I picture an obvious way it might fall over, it very well might fall over that way. So I'll make it not do that. I was gonna put a brace here. That was the original plan. But just seeing this thing now, with how thick this piece is, like, that's not falling over. This thing's already crazy overbuilt. I think all I need is wheel chocks to make sure this thing stays and we're ready to rumble. With the crane looking sturdy enough, it was time to give it a shot. I used these $3 slings rated for 2,000 pounds each to hang the chain hoist. I didn't factor in that these would have a little bit of stretch to them, so I should have built the whole thing a little taller. But compensating by lowering the car as much as possible before lifting should in theory give me enough clearance, assuming the engine would actually come out cleanly. Seems the trans is moving with it. I think I need to take some of those wheels off. That should give me some clearance. There we go. This is kind of a fun moment. Scrap wood taken from an old building in my hometown, lifting out the engine of my first car, rolling on wheels from one of my first videos. It's a satisfying moment. Not nearly the end of this project, though. It worked. I think probably setting it down on its side so I can get more height, and then hopefully I can get it in the back of the 4Runner. The problem is I don't have a pickup truck, and so I can't actually lift it right over. I don't think it's going in. At least not with just me doing this totally solo.
Well, how you do my ride next, all right?
I don't know if you want me working on it. I think the smart thing to do here is just disassemble the head. It's not just getting in the car. I don't know what getting out of the car looks like. Pulling the old engine may be the most satisfying part of the process, but it's far from the end. Getting it to the scrapyard is just as big of a task. Could I have done this a lot easier by asking a friend or two to help move it into the car? Yeah, but there is something satisfying about doing all of this solo. Even though this engine is junk, there's still kind of a sentimental value to it. Taking it apart makes it easier to move, but I'm also just curious to see the inside before it goes away. So I think the bolts that actually hold this head on are these, which are like a hex head that I don't have sockets of. I need a 10mm and a nut that fits it. That will be my socket. I don't know what kind of galvanizing or whatever this screw has. This might not work, but worth a shot. Let's see if that does anything. I wasn't confident in this DIY hex socket working, but if it does, saves me a trip to the hardware store. Nope. I think that would work if I used a thicker bolt and properly cleaned it so the weld is good. Yeah, I just gotta buy that socket. I'll probably need it later on anyway. I do think at this point I've taken enough weight off it that I could get it in the back of the truck, but I'm so close to getting to the piston heads, and I kind of just curious what they look like after whatever happened with the timing belt. Maybe I'll keep one of them as a memento or something. Oh, there goes the head. Oh, and now we can see the pistons. Look how nasty those are. That's crazy, because when I stuck the endoscope in there, these were like shiny. And now they're Like, it smells burnt. You can smell the engine oil. So that was just what happened from cranking it that couple times after I threw the timing belt on. With the head off, I was in the final stages of disassembling this engine. I decided to pull the pistons out. Maybe I'll clean them up and use them for something down the road. Part of me wanted to keep this engine around and make it a rebuild project, but at the end of the day, it's a Hyundai 4-cylinder. This one lasted longer than most. There you go. Nice. I forgot I still have the transmission. That's not gonna be any lighter. The transmission would be my final task for the scrap wood crane. I was pretty confident at this point it lifted the whole engine with basically no issues. Should be easy. Might just go with one sling. I'm still surprised the engine is what ended up killing this drivetrain. The transmission was on its last legs too. Not having the engine in the way made this easier to pull, but the body mounts were a little more constraining. Bet you never seen anybody pry a transmission out with a tree branch. Is this what people mean when they say shade tree mechanic? There we go. Does a tree branch count as scrap wood? It's very satisfying getting all this stuff out of here. I knew it was junk when I bought the car. I did my best to keep it on the road for as long as possible, but it's always been the dream to chassis swap this thing. And I'm doing my best to do that with what I have at my disposal. Even if that means building a scrap wood crane in my driveway just to disassemble it 2 days later. I'm having fun doing what I can. You know, a giant project like this can seem really intimidating, but viewing each part of it as its own small win, not putting all the stakes on the end result, just turns the whole thing into a fun learning experience regardless of what happens. And that's a wrap on the hoist, I think. Got the job done. I tell you what, it is a big relief now having everything that I can't lift by hand in there, or that I couldn't lift by hand before. Now I just gotta organize the other parts by what I'm keeping, separate the different metals, and take all this to the recycling center. I'm very pleased with these results. Hoist did its job. Now I can take it apart and reuse that wood for other stuff. Breaking down this crane was kind of a mess. When I assembled it, half the wood was frozen, and as it thawed, it kind of expanded around the screws, making them impossible to get out. It was also just cold as hell, and I was excited to be done with this thing, so I kind of had fun breaking it. It is sort of a weird one. Usually at the end of a project, I get the satisfaction of having some objective improvement to my workspace or my tools. But in this case, the entire result of the hard work is just having an object gone, but it's satisfying nonetheless. A small win, but a step towards being able to do the exciting parts of this project. With that, I just have to take the old engine away to be recycled, and until the weather gets a bit nicer, move on to other projects. Thank you for your time. Goodbye, my little in-lawn 4. You served me well. Here goes the transmission. Gotta watch my toes. Goodbye.